What is up, guys? We are back here, and we're going to be talking about Westward Expansion. This is the next set of notes that sort of goes along with the Industrial Age and the Gilded Age that we talked about a little bit before with Reconstruction. So without further ado, let's talk about Western Expansion. And if you're wondering, yes, guys, I do have a new program that I'm using for the slideshows. So without further ado, here we go. All right. So we're going to start off talking about the frontier. So at the time of the Civil War, it had been over 2 centuries since the first colonists arrived in the land and become America. However, more than half of the country's land remained unsettled. The land between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains was as large as all of Western Europe, but was viewed as the Great American Desert. So the interest of Western lands, yes, the interest of Western lands increased after the Civil War, and these three main categories that we see over here on the screen that I just circled in red. And they increased with farmers, railroads, and miners. And then the little bullet on the bottom is talking about what happened when conflicts arose between those groups and the natives that lived on the land they call the Great American Desert. So basically what happens is if conflicts arose between the groups and the natives, the U.S. government would go against the natives. The natives were forced onto reservations, and the Dawes Act attempted to Americanize them. We will look at the Dawes Act a little bit later in one of the future presentations that's coming up. I'll promise you that. So we're going to start off talking about farming. All right. Yeah, so farming, it was the first interest of three on why people wanted to expand into Western lands. And the first thing we're going to look at here is a little act created by the Congress called the Homestead Act of 1862. So the Homestead Act of 1862 gave 160 acres of free land to anybody who would live on and cultivate the land for 5 years. So this was a pretty big incentive for people to go out, move out west, because they'd be able to have land to sort of get away from the city life. And some people thought it was going to be good to help make money because they can sell the crops. And a lot of Europeans, believe it or not, came over to try to take advantage of this and cash in on it. So farming continued. So people from the east, south, and came in large numbers. Europeans also wanted to cash in, as I said before. And this is a really cool fact. So by 1900, between 4 to 6 million families took advantage of the government's offer. That's a big number. 4 to 6 million families took advantage of the government's offer, took advantage of the Homestead Act, and moved out to the West. All right, so now we're looking at why farmers encounter difficulties. So farmers encounter difficulties because of the difficult living conditions is the main thing. There was not a lot of wood out west, because it was because I call it the Great American Desert, and it was somewhat of a desert. There's more plains, though. So they had sod houses, like mud brick, and dugout homes. Some people would dig homes right out of hills. And then the other thing that happened a lot was there was a lot of droughts. And then because you're living on 160 acres, there's not a lot of neighbors nearby, so you get pretty lonely from time to time. Now, we'll talk about an invention later that changed this dramatically. That will be coming up in this slideshow, so stay tuned for that. So here's a picture of one of the sod houses. You can see here, I circled it in red. They're made out of mud brick. I'm trying to make the clicking. That's my mouse I'm using. I use an exterior mouse for these guys to know what the clicking is. But yeah, so that's the mud brick houses, or the sod houses that they would live in. And then other people would simply take a hill like this and then just dig into the side of the hill and make their house right into the hill. They really lived off the land. All right, so now we're going to look at some of the new inventions that help settle the plains. So here's our first one right now. So barbed wire. Yeah, so it was a good invention. It was invented by Joseph Glidden in 1864. And it kept cattle in and stray animals out. And there's a picture of barbed wire on the right. If you didn't know what that is, but a lot of people do. And next we'll look at the steel windmill. It was developed around the time of the Civil War, 1860s. seen here in the right, and it was main use in the plains was for pumping water because they had to get water from underground because there was not a lot of rivers or streams, and it was helped by the constant wind of the prairie, and it was nicknamed the Prairie Fan. Because before this we had windmills. Before this time period we did have windmills, but they were more used for purposes of like making of mashing grain and making bread and all that stuff and doing the wheat. It was more used for that. So here's a name you guys might have heard before. John Deere. So this is where we talk a little bit about John Deere. So John Deere is credited with making the first steel plow, which helped make farming a lot easier because it was more durable than wood ones, and it was called a sod buster because it was able to plow more of the field. And John Deere, as I said before, was credited with making it, and we know today that John Deere still makes stuff like that today. Their tractors, which are most famous for right now, lawnmowers, all that good stuff. And I believe this is our last invention that helped settle the plains, and this is the reaper/thresher. So it was pre-Civil War, 8 acres per worker. In 1890, 135 acres per worker. So what the thresher/reaper did was it would be pulled by oxen or some other type of big, strong cattle or horses, or basically animals, I should have said, and they'll pull it across the field they're going to be harvesting, and it will have a bunch of seeds in it, and it will till the dirt up, drop seeds down, and it will dramatically, as you saw by these statistics, increase the amount of seeds and the amount of crop that gets planted. As I said before, 8 acres would be planted before the Civil War, and after that, it would be 135 acres. So you can see the dramatic increase in the amount of wheat people will be able to plant or other crops. So now we're going to look at the importance of the railroad. So railroads helped by settling. Railroads helped by quickly moving people and goods to these settlements. So it definitely took off the loneliness to just farming. And around the time of the Civil War, right around 1860, 1850, now when Abraham Lincoln was elected, he made a promise to build the Transcontinental Railroad, which was the railroad that would connect the United States from California to Nebraska. Because we had railroads up to about Nebraska at this time, but they wanted them to connect all the way out to the western coastline. So that was Lincoln's goal, and he made it happen. It was finished in 1869. We'll talk more about that. So, as I said before, the ultimate goal is to build the Transcontinental Railroad. All right, so Transcontinental Railroad. It started in 1840. Surveyors began looking for possible routes to California. And then in 1862, when Lincoln was the president, Congress approved a route, and then they gave contracts to these two big railroad companies that were around at the time. Circled right here, the Pacific Railroad Company and the Union Pacific Railroad Company. I'm going to refer to them as the Pacific RR for railroad, and then Co for company. Same thing with Union Pacific. So basically, the Central Pacific Railroad Company, they started working on the West Coast. So this is really bad West Coast. They started working in California, and they went towards the East Coast. So you need to know that they went east. And they laid 689 miles of track. And if you're wondering, why did they lay 689 miles of track? Well, because when they were going to the east, they had to encounter the Sierra Nevada mountain range, which is one thing that the Union Pacific Railroad Co. did not. So the Union Pacific Railroad Co. They worked from Nebraska. It's really bad Nebraska, guys. So I needed this platform. Whoa, so that's supposed to be Nebraska. And Nebraska. And they are working west. They weighed 1,086 miles of track, and that was because a majority of the land that they laid the track on was flat, plain-like land. So they had an easier time laying the track. All right, so now we're going to go back to the Transcontinental Road again. So this is more facts about the Transcontinental Road. The companies had received 200 feet of right-of-way along the tracks and 20 square miles of land for each mile of track laid. So if you're a little confused what that says, basically what it says is if this is the railroad track, it's a really bad railroad track, but this is the railroad track. It's going through, it's going that way. It's going across the land. So every mile of tracks, say a mile was right about here, they would get 20 square miles of land for each mile of track laid. So they would get, so essentially they would get on either side about 10 square miles of land. So yeah, so this arrow, and that's just 10 square miles of land. I'm still working on typing this, doing this. Okie dokie. So if that makes any more sense to you, basically, they'd get every mile, the government, they would get land, about 20 square miles of land surrounding them, every mile of track. So the Transcontinental Road continued. So as a result of this, as a result of the 20 square miles of land around the track, the companies pushed hard to lay as much track as possible, and the final spike was driven at Promontory Point in Utah. And that was called the Golden Spike. They put it in the ground. It was made of solid gold, but then they knew if they left it in there, people would steal it. So as soon as they banged that spike in, they pulled it right. They had some strong guys pull it right back out again. And believe it or not, it's believed, and historians debate this, and it's believed that, and this is very debatable, vary between historian and historian, but they've been debating for centuries now whether or not the road owners, who were the people who drove the last spike in, the owner of the Union and the owner of Pacific Road, if they're actually able to bang the spike in, or if they actually had one of their workers bang it in for them because they couldn't get it in the ground. Anyways, that's just something for you to think about, process through your brain a little bit. So here's a few more things about the Transcontinental Railroad. So with the completion of the railroad, travel across the country was faster, easier, and safer. The West was more accessible than ever. So yeah, I believe the statistic was before the Transcontinental Railroad, it would take 6 months to get from the East Coast to the West Coast. But with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, it took 7 weeks. That's a big change in the amount of time it took to get from east to west. So now we're going to look at mining. So the current went up often from 1849 to the turn of the century. And that cry, if you were wondering, is gold. Yeah, so this is when the gold rush happened. It began in 1849 up to the turn of the century, and hundreds of thousands of prospectors made their way onto lands previously inhabited by Native Americans trying to find this gold. So a lot of prospectors were going out west at this time. So more, I believe we're coming up on the last slide. This might be the last slide. But the life for miners was dangerous with little real hope of striking it rich. Yeah, so basically what this means is, so the miners, they'd go out, they'd mine, but it was really dangerous because they'd be making these mine shafts, some of them would use explosives depending on the type of environment they're mining in, and if an explosive went off wrong, this is the point there, so you can basically straight gunpowder. TNT dynamite wasn't invented until 1900s. So at this point, they were using straight gunpowder. So if something happened, it was going to be catastrophic. And a lot of people died looking for gold, and a lot of people just couldn't find it and didn't strike it rich. There was always a few now and then that would strike it rich. And we saw a lot of these ghost towns, but these old mining towns that were put up in California and places out west like that. So that people would go out there, they'd find gold, and then all the other people would come along and be like, we'd look like to build this town. And they'd have a saloon, a hotel, and you'd be out there mining in the general store. And then as soon as the gold vein was dried up, deserted, became a ghost town. Nobody else would, it would just be uninhabited, and they'd move on to the next spot. And we will talk later, but it was the same way with oil in Pennsylvania and Cleveland. Anyways, guys, that's going to be the end of the video of today's Western Expansion slideshow. Make sure you tune in next week, maybe tomorrow or Monday. Probably Monday, I will post another video on the Cold War or something like that. Tune in to watch that one. And until next time that you guys hear my voice, make sure to show your love by clicking that big red subscribe button. Wow. But I cannot spell subscribe. That's why I am a history person. So make sure you click the button that looks like this one on the bottom, not the one on the top, blah, blah, blah. Click that subscribe button to show your love, and so that I will keep making these videos. Thank you. You guys are great, epic, and I love y'all.